Yurak Rumi is one of those sites frequently described with epithets like mysterious and shrouded in secrecy. How justified is this? And if it is justified, what exactly is so mysterious and enigmatic about this ruined ancient sanctuary?
Less than a month after discovering Machu Picchu, Hiram Bingham set out in search of Vitkos, the last capital of the Incas. In the Vilcabamba region, among the ruins of many other ancient settlements, he found this city. During the expedition, he also learned of a remarkable place nearby, a large carved rock above a spring, known as the Oracle of the Inca. For the Incas, many rocks, springs, caves, and even individual stones were endowed with magical properties and considered sacred wakas. According to one definition, a waka could be any material object that manifests something beyond the human. But the Oracle of the Inca was no ordinary huaca. At one time, all important rituals were performed there, and prophecies were given. As chronicler Antonio de la Calancha recorded, the stone there stands above a water source, and the natives worship the water as something divine. A white demon answers them from the stone, and sometimes it can even be seen. Years later, Bingham recalled his arrival at the site. On the evening of August 9, 1911, I saw it for the first time. Hills covered in dense forest rose on all sides. No birds were visible. Almost no sound could be heard. It was the perfect place for practicing the mystical ceremonies of an ancient cult. The remarkable appearance of this enormous boulder and the dark pool beneath its shadow made it a place of worship. The next day, after some clearing of the overgrowth, terraces with the remains of Inca structures were revealed before Bingham. The form of Yurak Rumi itself became clearer, white rock in the Quechua language. However, further study of the site was postponed, as the land to the east and south of the rock was heavily waterlogged. Bingham returned here the following year, in 1912. He drained the marshy area and conducted small-scale excavations. Then, leaving most of the site untouched, he once again returned to Machu Picchu. The destruction of this sanctuary is well documented. Antonio de la Calancha gathered eyewitness accounts of these events in his chronicles. Between 1536 and 1572, Yurak Rumi remained a site where the Incas, still strong enough to resist the Spanish, conducted all their major rituals. In 1568, the ruling Inca, Titu Cusi Yupanqui, invited two Augustinian priests, Marcos Garcia and Diego Ortiz, to establish a Christian mission in the Vilcabamba region. However, many of the indigenous people they baptized soon became terrified of their apostasy and began speaking of a curse from the white demon that inhabited Yurak Rumi. Then, in February 1570, the missionaries gathered a group of loyal followers, ordered them to collect firewood, and set out for Yurak Rumi. After performing an exorcism ritual, they burned the structures within the sanctuary. When Garcia and Ortiz returned to the mission, they were attacked by an enraged crowd and had to be rescued. The Incas immediately began restoring the sanctuary and reconsecrated it. But just 2 years later, in 1572, when Spanish forces swept through the region, destroying the last remnants of their independent state, the temple complex was burned and destroyed once again, this time permanently. This story, unfortunately, is all too typical for its time and clearly explains how and why the Urak-Rumi sanctuary disappeared. Far less is known, however, about when it was first built, who created it, and how. The question also remains, what served as its original foundation? And what did it look like at the beginning of its existence? Urak-Rumi is located 40 kilometers from Machu Picchu at an altitude of approximately 3,000 meters above sea level, in a wide gorge whose floor has been cleared and terraced. It is a relatively small complex, measuring only 40 by 60 meters. Small, yet it is indeed a complex. And, just like in many other places, it is easy to determine that several different construction techniques were used in its creation. The remains of structures made from small natural stones with an earthen mortar indicate that Inca buildings once stood here. There were roofs made of reeds and straw. This is evidenced by excavation findings. Wooden doors also existed. Charred remains of them have been found. All signs suggest that these were residential buildings, adapted for human habitation. Moreover, they are relatively late constructions, and their authorship is quite reliably established. The main characteristic of this group of structures is that they show no sign of masterful or meticulous stonework. But such craftsmanship is evident in the white rock and many other objects within the sanctuary. It is clear that these were created by someone else, by those who were skilled in working with stone. The core part of the complex had a compact and rather intricate structure. It is situated on a slope, which is divided into 4 terraces. At the center stands the Urak-Rumi rock, from beneath which a spring emerges. It is a solid outcrop of white granite, flattened, with a slightly elevated peak. The rock is over 7 meters tall. Its length is nearly 19 meters. Viewed from above, its outline is irregular. Each side of the rock has a different treatment. The western side has a diagonal slope. The northwestern side is vertical. It rises more than 7 meters high and features stepped configurations and rows of large bosses. The northern side is formed as a complex arrangement of shapes. On the southern side and at the top of the rock, there are numerous stepped features and chair-like formations, crafted with great precision. A small channel extends from the summit of the rock to its edge. Its rough execution sharply contrasts with the precise and polished forms of the steps and chairs nearby. It is believed to have been made by the indigenous people, serving as a conduit for sacrificial chicha, or the blood of llamas offered in ritual sacrifices by the Incas. Judging by its quality, this is entirely plausible. On the western side of the rock, there is a panel made of well-fitted blocks. Such a structure is found nowhere else. 4 granite blocks, featuring square elements, are aligned in a row and extend beneath the base of the rock. On the opposite side, a terrace with a facing of worked stones adjoins the rock. At some distance, there are several groups of smaller, formatted rock outcrops. Here, the configurations are not as precisely executed. The proportions of the protrusions and recesses are not strictly maintained, but the complexity and mastery of their execution remain impressive. North of the rock, at the base of a large terrace, there is another spring, more abundant than the one that flows from beneath Urak-Rumi. Its water flows into a drainage channel which retains many elements characteristic of the so-called fountains in polygonal complexes. In this case, the upper block of the drainage system features 2 rectangular section grooves. From there, the water is discharged down into the valley. Well-crafted granite blocks are also found in this area. Some of them appear to remain in their original positions, but these are only small remnants of former masonry structures. Most are scattered in disorder. It seems that polygonal structures once stood here as well. The T-shaped clamps for fastening indicate that the masonry could have been quite substantial. When and why these structures disappeared remains unknown. It is also impossible to determine what condition they were in when the Incas began their construction in the area. To understand what these structures were, how many there were, and where they were located, systematic on-site research is needed. It seems, however, that nothing prevented the Incas from building within the sanctuary. They incorporated only a few polygonal blocks into their constructions, just as was done in other places, such as nearby Vitcos. Few blocks remain today. The question of where they disappeared to, however, may have a simple answer. They were likely taken away after the complex had already been destroyed. Polygonal structures were dismantled in other places in the same manner. Their quality made them highly desirable. Research and excavations at Yurak Rumi have been conducted multiple times. In 2008 and 2009, Bauer and Areos Silva carried out extensive field work. During their investigations, they uncovered collapsed walls of Inca structures, remnants of charred roofing frameworks, and support beams. Even the burned remains of straw coverings were found, along with fragments of ropes that had been used to secure them. Remains of doors were also discovered, with iron nails nearby, short, with wide heads, clearly of Spanish origin. Additionally, many shards of Inca pottery were found, as well as part of a bronze weapon resembling a halberd. All of this is highly significant and intriguing. Equally important information comes from the layers of granite gravel hidden within the mounds and beneath the fallen walls of Inca buildings. Two types of gravel layers were identified. One type consists of coarse gravel, with pieces ranging from 3 to 6 centimeters or more. These layers vary in density and degree of compaction. They were not found inside the buildings, and all data suggests that they were originally surface layers. In other words, the Incas used gravel to cover open areas and create walkways, making movement around the complex relatively comfortable even during rainy periods. There are also signs that these layers were periodically refreshed, indicating that new gravel was added as needed. However, in 2 out of 14 excavation sites, the gravel layers were of a completely different type. Their thickness was up to 2 centimeters or less. The granite in these layers was finely crushed. In one case, the layer was double and located at a depth of more than half a meter, beneath thick layers of soil, humus, and redeposited material. Below it lay a half-meter thick layer of natural ground. In another case, the depth was shallower, 20 to 30 centimeters. Here, the layer was single, and beneath it was a thick layer of fill, typically used in terrace construction. Their location indicates that they formed after the terraces were already in place. Clearly, these were not gravel walkways. They could not have served such a function. Therefore, their presence must be explained by different causes. The excavation data, however, allow for a possible sequence of events in the formation of the complex. Initially, the site consisted of natural features, granite outcrops, and a spring emerging from beneath the white rock. Then, terraces were added. During or shortly after their construction, necessary modifications were made to the rock formations. At the same time, certain polygonal structures were built. The thin layers of finely crushed granite must have been deposited in the fill during this early period. However, they cannot be directly linked to the creation of carved rock features. Otherwise, similar layers would regularly be found near them. Yet, an excavation conducted directly adjacent to one of the modified outcrops revealed no such deposits. Finely crushed granite waste could have been produced in another context, during the processing of blocks. It is plausible that these deposits formed in locations where blocks for polygonal structures were being prepared. Thus, it becomes evident that for some time, Yurak Rumi existed as a polygonal complex. It featured shaped rock outcrops, water sources, and polygonal structures. Gravel walkways did not yet exist. At some later stage, a second phase began. The area of the complex was developed by the Incas. Houses with roofs appeared. Gravel-covered platforms and walkways were introduced between them. Some of the polygonal blocks were reused, and the polygonal complex transformed into a sanctuary. The purpose of Yurak Rumi has always been considered more or less certain: a temple complex, an Inca sanctuary. It is believed that it was created for this purpose and existed in this capacity throughout its history. There are, however, slight variations of this version. For example, a Czech expedition in 2005, after studying the complex, concluded that the Incas were knowledgeable in astronomy and that the white rock had been transformed into a precise astronomical instrument, a kind of gnomon. Another variation proposes something entirely different and rather mundane, that the stepped configurations and bosses on the surface of the vertical wall were elements used to anchor supports for the roof of some lightweight annex. As always, the underlying assumption in these cases is that the Incas were skilled stonemasons and experts in polygonal construction. This is taken as a given and is not questioned. However, it is quite evident that in everyday life and in constructing royal residences, such as Machu Picchu, built on the site of a former polygonal complex, the Incas used completely different technology. They worked with clay, roughly hewn, or even unworked stone. Their masonry was often held together with mortar. Many details in their buildings are merely crude imitations of what defines true polygonal structures. For example, trapezoidal openings and niches in polygonal structures were not decorative features but a natural consequence of the construction technique itself. And the difference between the original and its rough approximation is striking. Inca structures replicate only a few characteristic external elements of polygonal constructions. Moreover, they do so without understanding their function, resulting in crude imitations that lack necessary details. The only thing that can truly be credited to the Incas in this regard is their diligence and determination. Thanks to these qualities, they built thousands of grand structures from unworked stone, countless terraces, religious, military, and economic structures. That Yurak Rumi was a sanctuary during the Inca period is beyond doubt. There is direct evidence of this: the preserved remains of Inca buildings. Radiocarbon dating confirms it as well. Charred remains of roofing frameworks and supports, as well as the straw coverings themselves, date to around 1400 CE, which coincides with the expansion of the Inca Empire. But what was it before the Incas? How long did it exist in that role? Did it go through periods of greater and lesser activity? And how long did those periods last? Answers to these questions could be found by dating the thin gravel layers, which may be evidence of the preparation of polygonal elements. However, an attempt to determine their age using the radiocarbon method produced nearly the same result as that of the charred remains of Inca structures. Yet these could not have been created simultaneously. Moreover, the method chosen to establish their age raises questions and doubts. The age of these layers is unlikely to match the age of the carbon-containing impurities found within them, especially given the intense redeposition processes. At Urak-Rumi, most components were formatted versions of the natural environment. When the Incas settled in the complex, they clearly integrated themselves into an already existing composition. They put in considerable effort, renovating the water system, breathing new life into the remaining parts of the polygonal structures, and adapting them for their own needs. We see the same picture everywhere they attempted to restore and expand polygonal structures to the best of their abilities and knowledge. However, at Urak-Rumi, certain distinctive aspects of this kind of integration can be observed. The group of objects with polygonal characteristics functions here as the key, foundational, and moreover, active component. Meanwhile, the Inca structures appear secondary, playing a supporting role. Their primary function in this context was to maintain the active state of the foundational group of objects. This point is particularly noteworthy, as it is not commonly observed and, in this case, is rather well defined. Thanks to the Incas, the site remained in use until the mid-16th century. It seems that throughout this time, it continued to function according to its original purpose. This, apparently, was the basis for the stories about white demons that answered from the stone and could sometimes even be seen.